Good evening. Can you hear me?
Hi, Allie. How's it going? Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Awesome. So far, it's going to be a small crowd, but I'll have you start with your usual introduction at the beginning of the meeting.
Sure.
See if
Are you? Absolutely. Are you ready for that now, or do you want me to wait a few minutes till 6?
give people a few more minutes to trickle in.
Okay, sounds good. Good evening, everyone.
I got an interpreter just in case.
What's that?
Everybody here part of the development team. Got a couple members of the public as well.
It's for developer team.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a member of the public, I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
We'll get started in just a minute here. Looks like we have a couple people online, not too many. All right, it's 6 o'clock, so let's get started. Looks like we have 4 people online and 2 in the room. So I wanted to welcome everybody here and all of you on Zoom as well. My name is Em. I am a person within the city whose designated role it is to be a link between neighbors and the development that's happening nearby them. So I do work to set up these neighborhood meetings. And I also am a good point of contact for you all to have if you have further questions or you want to get involved in these projects going down the road as well. I am not a part of the planning team. I'm kind of set on the outside of that group so that I can just focus on public engagement, making sure that we're doing that in a quality way and kind of take that on. And I'm going to just keep admitting folks into the Zoom here. If you notice me looking at my computer. For those of you who are on Zoom, I want to welcome you all as well, and I'm trying my best to make sure that these hybrid meetings are welcoming and effective for everybody, both in the person and on Zoom. So we'll make sure that the chat is open for all of you. If you have questions or comments, you can feel free to put them in there, as well as raising your hand if you'd like to speak. We will go ahead and start with a brief introduction for myself. I'll go over kind of the ground rules, and then I'll pass it over to Kai, who's also here from the city to talk about the project from the city's perspective, and then we'll hear from the applicant team. Got some slides up for you all. And then very briefly, I'll have Allie Eden introduce herself and ask in Spanish if anybody needs Spanish interpretation, because we have that service for you all tonight.
Sure. Muy buenas tardes a todos, todas y todes. Hoy contamos con interpretación simultánea en español. ¿Hay alguien aquí que prefiere escuchar y participar en esta conversación en español? Bueno, si es así, por favor, que me mande un mensaje directo en el cuadro de chat o pueden interrumpir el grupo en cualquier momento. De otro modo, no vamos a iniciar la interpretación en este momento ya que nadie la está usando. Okay, it sounds like nobody's going to be using it at this moment, but I did let folks know to message me in the chat box or interrupt the group if they would like us to make sure that that service is going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allie. I appreciate it.
Sure. And I can keep putting that in the chat box too in Spanish and see if we catch any latecomers.
That sounds good. All right. All right, so again, this is our agenda. Our purpose is to provide the community members with information about the project and then give them time to ask questions. This is a great time to ask questions because we have a lot of people here who can answer a variety of different questions. We have several city staff, we have several people from the applicant team as well, who will know how to answer a lot of your questions. We also are able to take public comments at this time. We do record these meetings and they do become part of the record. So our meeting owl in the middle there is watching you all, and we'll take into account what you say so we can use it later for public comment. But I do want to stress that this is really meant to be an informative and question answering kind of time for you all. So we'll do a brief introduction and then set the majority of the evening aside for those questions. I do have some ground rules, and these are mostly just in the interest of making sure that everybody gets their time to speak in the time that we have allowed this evening. I want to be respectful for the time that you all have dedicated this evening, you've taken away from your family to be here. So I want to make sure that everybody gets their time to speak. So I do ask that folks raise their hand, both in the room and online, in order to ask a question. Online also is able to pop something in the chat. So if you want to ask a question, you don't want to speak it, you can put it in the chat as well at any time. Otherwise, you can use the raise hand function on Zoom. Don't talk over others, our kindergarten rules, basically. And make sure to, when you're making a comment or asking a question, try to stay on topic. There are a lot of different things that I hear about from folks that have feedback for things that the city does and don't necessarily pertain to the topic at hand. And I'm happy to help find the answers to those questions and comments. But we want to make sure that tonight we're focusing on the Bloom proposal so we can get as much as we can out of the people that we brought together tonight. All right. I spoke a little bit about who's in the room. I talked about myself and Kai. Kai is the planner on this project. We also have a couple of other city staff, including traffic and engineering staff tonight. They are online, so they can answer questions as well. And then we have the applicant team, and that's the group of people who come together and propose this project for development to the city. And it can include architects, landowners, and a whole variety of other experts who help design and build the project. So they are all here tonight as well. And then we also have myself, who again is kind of the facilitator tonight. I also am going to make sure that you all have my contact information so that you can stay in touch with me if you have questions that pop up later or want to stay up to date on this project. And the reason that I highlight the process here really quickly on the bottom is that we require these neighborhood meetings at a very specific point in the development review process. And you'll see it's just one step in. So we're a little bit early in the process. And the reason that we do that is because we want to make sure that it comes in at a stage where there's the ability to adjust based on public comment, and that the public is brought in early and maintains connection with the project as we go on. The downside to that is that sometimes we may have to answer your questions. Well, I'm not quite sure yet, because the plans may be a little bit nebulous at this stage. So there are pros and cons to that. But I will say that this is not the end of engagement on this project. So this is just the beginning, and we can always get you the answers to your questions. They might just be a little bit down the road. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kai to talk about the project from the city side.
Yeah, thanks, Em. Again, my name's Kai Clear. I'm the city planner for the project. To go back to maybe the previous slide, I could talk a little bit about this first little bullet point, the conceptual review in the process. This applicant team came in April and May for actually two different conceptual reviews, two different concepts for the site. I think the first one had 4 different types of uses on the site related to like drive-through, coffee, automotive shop, and a car wash, I think at the time. The second concept was for a car wash. And since that point of that conceptual review, the applicant team and city staff have gone sort of back and forth with additional concepts. So I suspect if any of you have seen the conceptual review from back in April or May, What they'll maybe present tonight is drastically different from that original submittal. You can go to the next slide. So the site here, refresh my memory on the acreage of the site.
5.5.
5.5 acres. So 5.5 acres. This site is actually part of the overall Mulberry and Greenfields PUD. So all that site work that you see where they're doing grading right now, just north of that, that is considered the Mulberry and Greenfields PUD land area. This is sort of that southwestern corner of that overall planned unit development. This is in District 4, I believe, of the Mulberry. And actually, if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, just a street view of some of the existing conditions there. The vet clinic to the right, and then to your left, I think a tire center and an Amish sort of woodworking place. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to flip the orientation on you. The first slide I showed, up was north. On this one, left is north. So down in the corner, you see District 4, that 5.4 acres. This is primarily their Bloom's commercial district, including District 3, which is part of their commercial district as well. And I'll talk a little bit about what the community vision is, from at least a high level perspective, and then sort of dive in a little bit to what the PUD vision is for this particular site. If you want to go to the next slide. So from a community vision perspective, we've actually are in the process right now. We're between first and second reading on the East Mulberry Corridor Plan. And basically, the East Mulberry Corridor Plan sets the vision for future development and land use within the corridor, and particularly related to this site for the next 10 to 20 years. And some of the most salient things out of the plan that the plan talks about is basically enhancing the frontage of the Mulberry Corridor. And for this, it would likely mean a couple things. So one, complying with current development standards. And I think even the PUD standards take it to an additional level from a design perspective. Two, it would be complying with Colorado Department of Transportation State Highway 14 Access Control Plan, which also has an element of like what the frontage will look like from a design perspective. So you have the frontage road, you have sort of a median strip, which is I think a swale at this point, and then you actually have the Mulberry roadway network. So Colorado Department of Transportation put together a preliminary cross-section that I think is actually in the next slide if you want to pull that up. Yeah, so kind of this preliminary cross-section. This was part of the old 2002 East Mulberry Corridor Plan. That was the original plan. Again, we're sort of past the first reading. It's been unanimously voted on by council for approval. The second reading's on December 5th, but this was part of that old plan. And this is reflected in the US 287 State Highway 14 Access Management Report. But it shows you'll have detached wide sidewalks, a row of trees, a bike lane, and then your travel lane for the frontage road, and then those additional improvements south, essentially, of this site. The other thing that East Mulberry Corridor Plan talks about is potentially making the frontage road into sort of this multimodal corridor that's off the highway to support things like walking, biking, people who might be mobility impaired along that frontage. And then the last thing I'll sort of mention, the corridor plan sets the framework for is a regional or local trail that would run north of the canal that is actually north of this site and outside sort of the limits of development of this site. So, but somewhat related. Next slide. So these were those original conceptual reviews. I'll let the applicant team sort of dive into the details of how this has evolved over the last several months. And then I think that should be it. oh, this is the most recent version of the site plan that we saw. But again, I'll let the applicant team cover that.
Awesome. I'll bring up your slides. Okay, take it away.
Cool. So thanks, Scott. Appreciate the intro. We have been working, our goal is to try to get aligned at some level with the city before we really started the process. It's always helpful rather than trying to come into the city with the really opposing viewpoints. So it's been good to understand a lot more about what the city's trying to accomplish on the East Mulberry corridor study. Our consultant team, like I said, has worked pretty hard to try to find a balance between what the goals are on East Mulberry, which is really to try to, I guess, create more of a densification, at least view along the corridor, and a little bit more urban, I guess you'd say, planning concepts also along the corridor. So that's been a bit of a challenge in regards to trying to fit in some of our uses. But you can kind of see our development team. My name is Dean Barber. I'm with TDC Development with Trey. Matt Delich is our traffic engineer. Rob and Emily are with Planscapes, and Troy Campbell, who's our civil engineer, maybe on the Zoom, I'm not quite sure or not, but he's our civil engineer on this. So pretty small development team. It's a relatively small project. Can you go to the next slide? So it's kind of hit out. We really don't have to go through this again, but it does give some context, at least where the project is regarding this. But yeah, it's part of the larger Bloom project. There wasn't a lot of definition on this particular tract or lot within the Bloom filing one. So we are kind of starting a little bit from scratch, although there are some overlying design guidelines and other things that govern the site through the PUD. And then the next slide is kind of, as Kai hinted at, kind of where we've been. And if you remember what he showed before, our buildings were really spread off. We had driveways between our buildings and Mulberry Frontage Road. We didn't have enough buffer along Mulberry Frontage Road to accomplish some of the planning concepts that he talked about streetscape and the sidewalk that's removed off of the frontage road. So it seems pretty simple, but it's actually really complicated to try to make some of these uses, a fast food restaurant, a coffee shop, a car wash, and maybe some retail, kind of work within those concepts. A little bit easier toward the back of the property, but toward the front of the property, you now have to orient your drive-throughs in a manner that they're really kind of screened from the public view as much as you can. You're trying to bring the buildings and the massing together. So it creates a much better pedestrian effect, both on the Mulberry Frontage Road and also on our private drive that comes up kind of to the north and goes to the small internal roundabout, within it. The uses that we've kind of, to make sure everyone's clear, this is really a land development project at this point. Although we do have interest from some users, there's really not anything specific. We don't have contracts, we don't have things like that at this point. So we're trying to create the foundation for a development by creating these guidelines and these general principles of planning, so that hopefully we then can get specific users identified as we go through the process and bring them to the table. So some of these may change as we go over time, but at least these are the types of uses that have shown and clients that have shown interest in the property to date. Really, as you can see, the way the site lays out, most of the development would be toward the frontage road or on the south side of the property. Most of our north side is going to be detention, and most of the detention then will release into Lake Canal back behind it. And there's also a lot of buffer yards along that. So we've tried to be sensitive to really try to pull our development toward the south as much as possible and keep it, away from kind of the open space that the ditch creates as well. And so, and even some pedestrian connectivity up to the ditch where people can at least enjoy that. And maybe at some point in the future, some type of, we've got a lot of hurdles around whether a pedestrian connection will be there or not. But at the end of the day, we're trying to afford for future potential things. Really from a traffic standpoint, Matt's done the traffic analysis. You know, the good thing about Frontage Road right now, not heavily traveled, definitely with the new development to the, or the new street improvements to the east, as well as some of the connectivity to the west. You know, really, we're anticipating that we'll have to create a deceleration lane and a right turn lane into the site. We don't want traffic, you know, stopping in the frontage road itself to slow down. Left turn lane as well on the eastbound side, you know, really within that 2-lane, really not creating a turn lane or anything, as we believe most of the traffic will come from the east. And the main roundabout that's being constructed to the east of our site through the master development. Really beyond that, in a nutshell, that's kind of it. As said, we're planning to subdivide the land into 4 properties, sell or lease or develop those properties depending upon use and needs. But again, trying to create kind of a cohesive development that appreciates the Mulberry corridor requirements. I think most people know there hasn't been a lot of new development along Mulberry Road for a while, so we're really excited to try to figure out how the uses that we feel will be pretty common along this corridor also can work within the design guidelines that the city has envisioned. So with that, did I miss anything? Is it over here? So anyway.
Thanks so much. Kat, I wonder if you could very briefly explain the PUD, what PUD means, and how this is part of the project as a whole, but not a little bit set aside.
Yeah, I'll do my best, and maybe you guys can do it. So the Mulberry and Greenfields PUD, basically it's a mechanism that developers have the ability to utilize to provide flexibility in development standards in exchange for providing like some sort of extraordinary outcome as part of the development. So in this case, the Mulberry and Greenfields PUD almost directly overlays a metro district, and the metro district itself had like public benefits that they were required to provide as part of the metro district. The PUD sort of piggybacked on those public benefits and provided things like affordable housing, enhanced design, a cohesive like roadway network, cohesive architecture between all the phases of development. And basically we allowed in exchange for that maybe reduce levels of review. So instead of a type 2 planning and zoning commission level of review, certain types of land uses would be subject to type 1. But in this case, it's an overlay, it acts as an overlay district to the underlying zoning. So in this project is zoned general commercial along the frontage here. That district 4 that you saw on my previous slide, that's an overlay district. So all those things I talked about, the enhanced design standards, there are actually district specific standards and use specific standards that will supersede the city's land use code. So act as potentially a new set or act as a new set of standards for this development, any development as part of the greater project. So hopefully that
Just
touched on it.
to summarize for myself, because I am trying to make sense of all this alongside you all. So the PUD, which stands for Planned Urban Development, Unit Development, thank you, is a kind of extra layer of standards for this particular area that the project we're talking about right now is within. And so that's been already kind of set up. And with that, there have been discussions about what would potentially go in this area as well as the areas around it. And now we are kind of focusing in and getting more detailed on this particular tract so that we can then start to develop it. Helpful? Okay. If anybody has questions about that, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, we will go ahead and jump into Q&A here. I do have a few questions on the chat. So I will go and start with those and then we'll get to the folks in the room. The first question on the chat is, will there be an entrance from Vine? Specifically, don't want folks cutting through to avoid the train.
Our project specifically doesn't have any connectivity because of the ditch is fairly, it's a pretty stout border. Our only access, and per what Kai referenced, CDOT's access control standards, we're really only allowed the single access point vehicularly onto the front road.
Okay, so no access to this particular tract from Vine.
Not directly.
Yeah, and I can maybe just add on to that. So part of the PUD master plan, in Bloom filing 1, they sort of developed the roadway network. There's gonna be a railroad crossing that's required to get to Vine from Mulberry up through Greenfields. That has to go through the Public Utilities Commission to get approval. And that's a big, long process that's probably gonna take years before that connection can be made between this and Vine. So this area in Vine.
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah.
Okay. I will do one more and then we'll get to folks in the room. I keep hearing talk about more biking and walking in that area. But the businesses proposed like daycare, fast food, car wash, and car retail store seems to be more car focused. I'm curious why you think these businesses kind of fit with the multimodal plans that we have for the area.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think everybody understands today Mulberry is almost 100% vehicular, right? You don't see anybody walking up and down Mulberry and the rest. So as this area redevelops, the vocabulary and the utilization of Mulberry will change as well. Now, obviously with the Bloom development that you look at, that's a lot of residential, right? There's a lot more opportunity for the pedestrianized and biking to start to all of a sudden blend its way down and more. So I think the key at this point, is it's not instantly going to happen. There will be a myriad of uses along Mulberry. Some of them may be more pedestrian and bike friendly, some of them more vehicular. It's still going to be a major vehicular arterial through the town. But I love this concept of creating these bike lanes on the frontage road and some of the offset, because that's a much safer and more pedestrianized environment than right on Mulberry. So the city's obviously thinking through that. I love Kai's thoughts, but they're thinking through this to try to create these kind of offset pedestrian and bike ramps that can still connect people so that, if there is residential to the east or the west of us, they can ride their bikes or walk to our development. Maybe 5 years, maybe 20 years, it'll be some major redevelopment before that type of bike and vehicular traffic starts to become noticeable, but the framework's being laid now.
But I think can you go to our new site plan? Yeah, so there's things that don't immediately jump out, but that we've worked with Kai and planning and others quite a bit to address this kind of future state where Mulberry may be more pedestrian and bike friendly. And the example is the 2 buildings, you'll see there's no drive aisles, there's no parking between the building and the frontage road. And that's to accommodate that in the future. So down the road, when people are biking and walking past the site, they can walk right off the frontage road into the buildings and not have to cross drive out. It's much easier for us to lay it out with drive outs that go right against the frontage road. And that's how we started. But where we ended was this configuration.
Thank you. All right.
And I'll just mention, so the East Mulberry Corridor Plan, it sort of acknowledges this as like a business corridor and sort of a highway and a gateway into the community. And it also acknowledges there's sort of a character they created as part of the plan, like character districts for the East Mulberry Corridor. And this particular one is the frontage character district. And it's really envisioned to sort of, to Dean's point, stay this way, sort of auto oriented. This is a big transit route for trucks and shipping through the city. So from a state highway perspective, this takes you up to 287 in Laramie. And it's a critical route for trucking and logistics. So it will likely stay that way into the future. And
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, it does meld with the whole PUD overall with the amount of residential that's going in there. That's more of the bicycle connection than you would have from I-25, obviously, or downtown, Fort Towns. But yeah, as you said, the corridor plan, eventually, most cities put this together with the hopes of having some kind of pedestrian bicycle organization. Is probably one of the first projects that's gonna have something that kind of fits that category over time. So
Yeah.
as it develops.
yeah, that's a good point. This is one of the first projects in city limits along State Highway 14. The rest of all the development that's happened along this corridor has largely been in the county. And a lot of the guidance sort of fine tunes that vision of multimodal transportation along this corridor to be contained within the frontage road. And I suspect there will have to be a corridor design study done to really, at some future date, to really hone in on what that looks like.
All right, thank you both. Anyone in the room?
Yeah, I guess I had a question about the car wash. So you said you're doing land development now and kind of opens the door for different uses, but it seems like a car wash would maybe go against that, I guess. I don't know. But that you wouldn't be able to use that for other things in the future.
Yeah, it's a little, yeah, I mean, it's a little bit more specific. As said, we have had some interest, so this is at least the 4 uses that people have approached us and shown some preliminary interest. So we're trying to get out in front of that. We don't have any specific users that have committed to date. So as we build this is the tough thing, which I love as a person that lives in Fort Collins, and I hate as a developer in Fort Collins. I love the fact that they really are very quality focused and they want to understand the micro planning of projects. But it's not an easy place to do speculative land development because you've got to develop the site plans and the uses and the rest of it. So if the car wash doesn't become a car wash, then we're going to come back in the process. We'll keep coming back in this process until all the uses are fully defined. And that's kind of the way the city of Fort Collins works. But this is our best guess today, but it may change going forward. And if so, then I don't know if we come all the way back to the neighborhood meeting, but definitely as we start making submittals, there will be, when we're getting close to the end, if a use changes, we may have to go back and get a couple more reviews done and to incorporate that use in a specific site plan with it.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I guess just to add, I don't know, with the car wash, like when we talk about urbanization and pedestrianization, just I don't know, it seems to kind of go against all that, especially with the East Mulberry plan and stuff like that. It's a building that you can literally only be in your car to use.
Sure.
I don't know, that's as someone who lives in Mosaic and would like for it to be more walkable and bike friendly, that would be a frustrating use to me, I guess.
So the property will be split up in 4 different properties. In a certain size that allows multiple different uses. So these are very conceptual, obviously, there's nobody has stepped in and that's what we want. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it becomes a car wash, but you meet the needs of the community too. If there's a need, if there's no need, the car wash developers.
Yeah, I guess the other thing that I, sorry to cut you off, but there's 2 car washes pretty close by. There's one on Mulberry and LeMay, and there's another one on Timberline and Prospect. So
typically it's 2 mile different.
Yeah.
It's really changing a lot these days, these car washes due to the efficiency of the utilization of recycling and things like that. At the end of the day, as Guy would said, this is a very heavy vehicular. So I think you're going to continue to see a lot of the uses along this. As it kind of has been, right? Somewhat industrialized, somewhat, so it'll take a while before it becomes more community retail and from end to end. But I do think even with that, like college, you'll see a lot of vehicular type uses, gas stations, restaurants, fast food thing that people tend to utilize, but, yeah, I don't, at the end of the day, whether that's a car wash or not, but I do understand your concern.
Yeah, I think it's like a chicken and egg kind of thing too,
It
like,
is.
yeah, people don't walk and bike on Mulberry because there's nothing to walk and bike.
Yeah, that's.
So what do
Yeah.
you, a question, what do you foresee as a pedestrian use more of as opposed to
Something you can walk into, I guess, I don't know, something I can use as a pedestrian or a biker, like a car wash. I can't,
Right,
so like
I
a
guess.
coffee shop, I guess would be a good one, but yeah, even retail, like anything I can. As a biker or pedestrian use, a car wash, I can,
okay, I was just curious, I mean,
yeah.
yeah, okay.
I think maybe to piggyback on that, one of the things not knowing, moving into Mosaic, the disconnection with the city, right, as far as. Being able to get in and the bypass and that, I think little different take than the previous comment online is. I do think the coffee shop retail and that would be very welcome to get to, but what would trigger? Like if I look at that, I still gotta go out on the service road, right? I think there's a lot of concern in Mosaic about increased traffic with, Bloom being developed there, like. What would trigger some type of access point? Across the ditch or however we would get there, like how would you envision that? Or would you have to go all the way around? Because I anticipate Bloom will be very similar to Mosaic, is that people are very walkable, bike friendly. I think people would go there without their car if they could do it easily, but I'd look at this and I'm not sure that there's a way to get there easily.
No, that's a good point. I mean, ultimately, I think the city's gonna continue to push the developers to think about future connectivity. North, south, east and west to create those conduits. Obviously there's inherent challenges, like this one's a mess because of the ditch, is still county property. As Kai kind of hinted at, this is city property, then you've got the Greeley level water lines that are on the north side that are, you can't touch those, and so there are things that people don't see that are impediments to a lot of this. But I will say the effort, the city and the developers don't lack the intention or the effort to try to figure out ways to connect this better pedestrian wise. I'm just glad to see, I mean, I was concerned when we started this that they really wanted to shut down the frontage road or something, because you're seeing a lot of that happen. But I think the frontage road is going to be a real blessing to Fort Collins to try to create somewhat of a pedestrianized and bicycle conduit outside of the main, 14 vehicular transport. But how that's connected north and south, I think there are still a lot of questions from that.
So it's a huge benefit, obviously, with the frontage road. If you go Highway 34, which I used to bike back and forth 20 years ago, it was simple. I would never get on a bike on 34 anymore. Same with Harmony. This is one of them, last old style with the frontage road. So that frontage road is kind of a huge benefit as far as bicycle and pedestrian goes. It's just a matter of how things continue to develop. If they continue to develop in this fashion, that draws that type of situation, and hopefully that frontage road just continues to be maintained as a frontage road, keep the high-speed Mulberry traffic off of it, such. So that kind of connection would be there.
From the city's perspective though, because these are good, right? Because I think a lot of people, we don't know where the county and the city end and start and, all of that, trying to end industrial area. But, if you put bike paths along here and sidewalk, like how far does that go? Does that just run that span and then there's nothing and you're back to chip and seal or,
Yeah, so some of the requirements that we have might help get us a sidewalk connection to the greater Bloom development along the frontage road. One of the comments that we've consistently had is trying to get a pedestrian bridge across the canal into District 3, which is Bloom's like commercial core, where they'll have like a lot of those neighborhood serving uses, potentially a grocery store, stuff like that. It's, I think, partially what Dean had mentioned, it is a challenge. There is an intervening property owner. The only way you can get across that would be through some sort of agreement with the ditch company. And the ditch company has been difficult to work with. historically. The other thing I'll mention, Delosier, which is a little bit to the west of here. Do you know where Delosier's at? And if you can go back to, I'm not going to say this is going to be a,
Is this okay, or do you want the one with?
yeah, that's great. So Delosier, in bloom sort of rides this western edge of the site, and it's anticipated to come down and connect into the street. Now, don't ask me how or when, but this could be 10 years, 20 years down the road. When this redevelops, they've secured right of way through here. They would just have to figure out how to make a street connection here, and it would provide some greater level of connectivity down to the frontage road, I guess, from a different route. And then again, that's where that commercial core will be for Bloom. The thing that city's been advocating for, and what the PUD standards really talk about, is getting pedestrian connections, like pedestrian bridges across impediments like canals to other portions of the PUD. We're just not sure it can be done in this case. And then again, that sidewalk as part of Bloom is going to be constructed up to this point. This development will build this sidewalk, but there's going to be this intervening parcel that doesn't have a sidewalk that our engineering staff will likely have some comments with respect to providing overall connectivity to the larger development. So it's still kind of like an ongoing conversation between staff and the developer at this point.
The other question that I have online right now is regarding a grocery store, and I've gotten this question myself a few times about this project. Can you elaborate on plans for a grocery store, where that might go, and what kind of is involved in this particular part of the project versus other parts that are happening simultaneously?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people would acknowledge that a 5-acre site is too small for any type of a grocery store or that, so that isn't a use that we've anticipated. We are not the developers to the north, and I think you saw in Kai's plan, they have a large commercial where they are. I'm not really certain. I think they're just kind of a few steps behind us, just starting their conceptual designs and things
I
like
mean,
that.
I've heard that's aspirational. I think
Yeah.
they're working hard to try to do that. Again, that's not our project, so can't comment, but I have heard the term thrown around, so I think that's a pursuit for sure of theirs. You know,
And it is a 5-acre site, but is it more than an acre? I forget now, it's detention
yes,
of that.
Yeah.
it's only less than 4.5 developable.
Okay, so the site's not big enough for a grocery store,
Yep.
but other folks that are developing around this area are looking at it.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, just from a historic perspective, the rooftops always come before like a grocery is established. So the commercial portion of the Bloom development happens last, just based on economics in the market. They do mention in a lot of their conversations I've had with them, a potential grocer in that area. There's a section of that district, the larger district that's across the ditch, that's reserved for a grocery store. So it's zone neighborhood commercial, which limits the purpose of the zone district is to encourage and even sort of make a monopoly out of that zone district for grocers to locate within that zone district. So that is something you're likely to maybe see in the future. It's just really unknown when that could be.
I don't have any other questions online right now. I do have some suggestions for businesses. I have a suggestion for a dog park, and then more kind of support for pubs and coffee shops that are more walkable. But for those of you online, if you'd like to ask another question, feel free to put your hand up as well. And then also looking at the chat, I'll turn it back to folks in the room if there are any other questions in here.
Yeah, a question for Kai maybe. So does the city kind of, you said it's a different developer on the other side of the ditch, do you kind of coordinate? I guess I'm mostly speaking commercial wise between the two of kind of, you know, what they can do? Or are they gonna come and say, we're doing a car wash and test?
Yeah, so it's pretty wide open. Like how it works is you have a zone district. It basically prescribes what uses you can do in the zone district. And anybody who wants to come in and develop can like pick from the list. Say, I want to do this. And there's a certain process that they would have to follow. The only way they would be prohibited from doing a car wash is if it wasn't listed in that zone district as a permitted use. So it's just kind of open to the market.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I just had something more of a comment maybe, but it's kind of mentioned before, but Mosaic and I guess Bloom is gonna be pretty cut off from like services and things like that, so I don't know, I feel like this is a good opportunity to fill some of that.
I think though, don't forget, there's District 4, I think it's 25 acres of the other Bloom is.
Right,
the commercial uses. So we're only looking at our piece, but
Yeah,
they are planning for 5 times that.
Okay, yeah.
Ultimately.
We'll have big districts.
So, I mean, do you know, is that all, because there's like a different color or different zone than yours, like, is that all commercial or is it like?
They do have a big section there. I guess we're District 4, they're District 1.
District 3. Yeah.
Because that a different like zone?
Yeah, so District 3, again, this is going back to the PUD. So this is an overlay district, which gives it like supersedes some of the city standards with respect to like building design, parking, stuff like that. But the underlying permitted use list, there's 3 other districts here. There's general commercial, which sort of aligns with that District 4. District 4 is general commercial. As you get further north towards where I have listed filing 4, that's that neighborhood commercial tract. It's about 10 acres in size. And then there's an employment zone district a little bit further down towards filing 3. So it's envisioned that District 3 is going to be a combination of neighborhood serving uses, which typically is like childcare, banks, dental offices. Like if you think about North College Marketplace, those are some of the uses you might envision around a grocer. The other part of this is that I think just by the zone district itself, employment, they envision some sort of office type uses in there as well. So it could go a few different ways. There is a more developed plan than this. So the PUD overlay plan shows just like kind of the general framework of the districts and the main streets that cut through the development. They have a more refined plan set that shows the pedestrian spine that will come down where it shows one drive. That's REO way now. And then that will sort of connect into the center of that District 3 into a big kind of like public space that would serve the community around that area. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I could try to pull up some images.
I think this is where it gets hard to not have the derailing questions that you were warning against ahead of time, because I mean, really, for you guys, like knowing more about this, I don't have any, I mean, I think we've laid out thoughts on that, and I mean, I think it's great, but I can't imagine the puzzle pieces with this, but you know, there is a reality that you have a neighborhood that's still waiting on a city park, that's still cut off, you know. When we talk about 5, 10, 15 years, I mean, that's a long time in a life cycle. People could raise their kids, they're gone.
Yeah.
You know, how does a community help fast track some of that stuff that's already, you know, we're watching more development. I mean, I'm in the real estate business, I'm not opposed to that, but I'm also like, you know, are we getting beyond promises that have already been made, you know, and losing, I guess I think some of the angst about the walkability and that comes from the disconnected feeling that the community already has.
Yeah, this is sort of a pocket of city urban level development within the county that's developed over like the last 100 years. So yeah, like it's an island away. Like if you were to try to get to this, I have some friends in this neighborhood, ride your bike to that Old Town, like, good luck.
Yeah, you gotta
Yeah.
take Vine or Timberline
Yeah.
and, you know.
So it's just part of like those growing pains, as you've mentioned. I think as this is the first project in the door. Hartford, who's the developer for the remaining portion of the project, they're, I think, in a close place to start thinking about the commercial development side of this. They've just gotten through, like, filing 3 is gonna go to hearing next month, December 21st. You guys will get a notice for that. That's for additional residential and multifamily. And then filing 4 went to hearing a couple months ago and was approved, which is an additional like 400 rooftops. So the market is building. I suspect the commercial portion of it is right on the heels of all this other stuff. There was another part of your question that I wanted to speak to a little bit, but I forgot my train of thought on it. So
Maybe
I'm
to
like-
the infrastructure, the things that were already, like the parks and stuff that are
Yeah,
already kind
yeah.
of part of the commitment, but yet have no actual end date.
Yeah, so from a park planning perspective, we collect impact fees when building permits are issued for parks. So it's based on rooftops also, you know, the park that's in Mosaic,
Right,
that's not really a park yet.
right.
So basically they have to get enough impact fees before they can actually put up the capital for constructing the park. I can check and see like where they think they're at with the construction of the park. It could be a couple of years out. The other thing too is like the city has a they have a budgeting for outcomes or a budgeting cycle for every 2 years. And some of the things that you could advocate for are like allocating more of the city's resources to building parks or something. So there's some different ways you can approach it, but I'll check with our parks department and see where they're at with the actual park that's in a Mosaic. And aside from that,
We also had a ballot measure that just got passed to help support some funding for parks as well. Before that all. But
yeah,
it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, like you mentioned. We have to have people who are gonna use the park before we put the park there, but we have people who wanna move there that probably won't move until there's a park, so. I think hearing that there's a demand for such things, especially when it comes to kind of these free market businesses, so like a grocery store, they're gonna wanna know that if they put a grocery store there, they're gonna get business, so it's helpful to hear those things from you all.
yeah. And I'll go back to, I remembered what you had mentioned. So in 2002 with the original East Mulberry Corridor Plan, like it was always envisioned that not only this, but like the greater corridor would be annexed into the city and the city would provide services for the area. It just it's never come to fruition. That was in 2002. And back in 2002, they assigned 20 acres, so part of District 3. And then there's this property to the east, it's called the Peakview property. And back then in 2002, they did a market study and they said, we need to assign some portion of this district. They studied Greenfields Court and Timberline in Mulberry to have a grocery store in here. And they chose this location, assign that zone district. And up until now, this is the first annexation that has happened in this area of the district since 2002. And that was back in, I think, 2018 that the annexation was approved, but the development plans have been kind of going ever since then. So 2019, they got the Metro District. 2020, they started planning out filing 1. 2021, they got approval filing 1. 2022, like it's just sort of been progressing pretty slowly, but it's taken 20 years to actually get to this point. And the vision's still consistent with what it was in 2002. But we're just now seeing this be like an economic reality for developers. The other big thing is like, there's a dry creek floodplain out here there was a bunch of infrastructure projects that were done over those 20 years to pull some of these properties out of the floodplain and make them more developable. So that was part of the thing too, that kind of held up development here historically. So it's hard to say when they'll actually build it. But maybe in the next few years.
It takes funding, it takes city council's approval, it takes parks department. As far as the parks go, building a park, you can't, the development's gonna put it together, the funds are gonna be there. That doesn't guarantee the park's gonna be there either right away. It's gonna take budgetary, because it's not just building the park, you gotta maintain it, so. Working with the city council and such on pushing those elements forward is a big part of getting that done too. It's not just a developer's got it done and donated the land. The houses are all built, the fund money is there. It takes a lot more, and then grocery stores are almost impossible from my perspective, from dealing with it in Loveland. They've been wanting a grocery store west side of town for 20 years. The land's there, the zoning's there, the rooftops are there, no grocery store. You go over to Centera, they've been fighting hard for a grocery store forever. And it's very difficult from those standpoints, especially from a developer standpoint, trying to get those uses put in there.
From the aspect of the business, it's just not there to move in, or
Sometimes it's ready to go, but the commitment by the grocery stores just they aren't there. It's just and I don't completely understand it, but
yeah, we pulled up the chicken and egg concept a couple times, but people move with the understanding of certain things, coming along as part of the process, and then it doesn't, right? And then there's, because we're facing kind of an uphill battle with housing right now with costs and interest rates and that, and we're going to have all this residential development. I think that people that move there are, going to be similar to, I think, a lot of the mindset in Mosaic, that they'd like to see other stuff come along with it to enjoy, their choice of where they chose to move to.
right.
Yeah.
Sometimes developments like this that is proposed is a push to get other developments going. Sometimes it's the first one that comes in and puts that risk together and puts something together, gets someone in there, and then things start popping, basically. And like Centura, and refer back to that, they're putting the Whole Foods in there that has a marker to get everything else going around it, but that's what it takes.
Right.
So developments, even this small, with the uses that may come in there, ends up, the traffic gets in there, not the traffic, but the clients, the business gets going, and then that just starts moving things.
Attractive.
I really appreciate the comments. It sounds like we're mostly kind of on the same thinking. There's just some challenges in the way. I do want to kind of focus while we have all of our folks here on District 4 just before we wrap up, so we can make sure that there's no other questions in that particular district. I do have a couple questions online. Any other questions in the room about District 4? Awesome. Okay, this kind of goes back to what Kai was saying about zoning and what's allowed, but how can we make sure that there's not multiple car washes in District 4 or even District 3 and District 4? And I think that just kind of boils down to the market.
Yeah.
Car wash owners are gonna have to analyze how much money they're gonna make when they put a car wash somewhere, and if they put it right next to the next door car wash, they're gonna make less money. So the city doesn't necessarily regulate that, but the market tends to. And then, is there an estimate on how long before the lots are filled on District 4 with specific businesses and are opening?
If things go well, we'll be building sometime in late 2024, the infrastructure and things for it. And if uses are identified, then, 2025, you would probably see openings of some of these businesses. I'd like to say, like I said before, we have 4 commitments, and I can tell you the exact dates, but we don't. But that's the goal right now, is probably 2025. And You know, and I'd say optimistically, at least 3 out of the 4 sites will probably be built by that time frame.
Great, thank you. I also have a question. How can we attend a similar meeting for District 3? And I'll just kind of tell you all about that a little bit. It sounds like District 3 hasn't come through development review yet. So, and we don't really know when that's going to happen. It's being developed by a different group called Hartford, and they've been working on other areas nearby, but they haven't brought District 3 to us yet. When District 3 comes in, we will require a neighborhood meeting for them, just like this one, and we will send letters out to the same 1,000-foot radius. So you'll receive a letter if you received a letter for this particular district. They're so similar in location that should be the same radius. So you'll be able to get a letter and you'll be able to attend a meeting just like this one for District 3. We're just not quite sure when that will be. All right. If there are any other questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to go over our kind of next steps here so that you all know how to continue engaging on this project as we go further. All right. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, this project or this neighborhood meeting is recorded. I post those neighborhood meetings on our YouTube playlist. And so there's a link to that playlist in the document that I put in the chat for folks online, and there's the same document in hard copy for those of you in the room at the entrance. And that I usually try to get those up in about 48 hours. So if you don't see it up there, you can send me a message and bug me about it. But I'll try to get it up as quickly as I can. If you want to go back and remember what we said, or if somebody wasn't able to make it, you can send it to them as well and they can watch. Additional neighborhood meetings are sometimes scheduled. It's at this point up to the applicant if they'd like to continue working with the public in person. Typically we have the one neighborhood meeting and then we start launching into these rounds of review where the proposal is going through changes and things are getting complicated. And we then bring the proposal back to a public hearing, which will be your next chance to engage in person on this project. And that'll be a type 2 hearing. Type 2 indicates that it goes before the Planning and Zoning Commission. So the Planning and Zoning Commission will hear the project. They'll have a similar presentation to what you just saw, but a little bit more detailed. And then there will be a public comment portion. So if you'd like to comment and have your comment used as testimony for the decision makers who will ultimately decide, does this proposal adhere to the land use code or does it not? If so, and it's gone through several rounds of review and staff assures that it is, then they'll grant approval and we'll continue on the process to get building permits and then start building. So that's kind of what we're looking for down the road. I am always available throughout the lifespan of this project and development review to continue answering questions and continue taking comments. So my email address is also listed on this document at the entrance to the room and the one that I put in the chat for you all. And you should feel free to email me anytime. If you're not quite sure where your comment or your question is supposed to go, you can send it to me. And instead of having to go through a phone tree or a confusing directory, I'll make sure that it gets to where it needs to go. So you can kind of consider me the front person for this. And I'm happy to connect you with a variety of other staff in the city who can help answer questions as we continue on. And that is all that I have for you all this evening. I will hang out on Zoom for another couple minutes, but otherwise you all are free to go. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, and just for a point of clarification from a process perspective, the type 2, I think, was based on the original conceptual review where they were proposing automotive repair. I think with this current mix of uses, from what I can tell, it might just be a type 1 level of review, which is still a hearing. It's just one decision maker instead of 7. Like instead of a commission, it's one hearing officer. And typically those hearings, do they still happen in this room?
They're all virtual, the type 1 hearings.
Okay.
So we'll send out letters to the same radius for the hearing, and that'll indicate if it's a type 1 or a type 2 hearing. The difference is the decision maker. The agenda stays the same, so there will still be a presentation of the project and then public comments. So you'll still have the opportunity to comment to the decision maker. Instead of having the entire 7-person board of commissioners. A type 1 hearing has an appointed hearing officer, which is usually somebody who is well familiar with our land use code and is able to make that decision. So it shouldn't be too much of a difference for you all as members of the public, but it's just kind of a little hindrance complication. So. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Thanks, you guys, for coming.
Breaking it down.
Oh, thanks, Seth.
Very sure.